everyone and welcome back to my channel. So I really want to make a dress out of pearls. I've seen a lot of people make bags and tops out of pearls, but never a dress. But I think it would look really good. I got 10mm beads right here, and I also got some fishing wire to bead it all together. And I'm also gonna need scissors, but besides that, that's all I'm gonna need. And I've never really done this before, so I hope it turns out good. But yeah, let's just get started. So the original way I planned on making it was to make two separate cups and then the bottom of the bodice and then attaching them together. And I was going to make the first one and then show you how to make the other one after I figured out how to make it. But after I made it, it was so ugly that I undid it and decided to do it a different way. And here you can see me undoing the whole thing, which actually took me a while to make, but I definitely did not want that becoming a part of my dress. So yeah. And at this point, I still had no idea how I was going to even make the skirt, so I was just taking it one step at a time. So basically what I did is take a really long piece of the fishing wire and put 4 beads in the center. And make sure that it's centered because we're going to be working with both ends of the thread and you don't want one end to run out before the other. I took one end and threaded it through the bead farthest away from that end, making a loop of 4 beads. Then I put 2 beads on one thread and 1 bead on the other and took the thread with only 1 bead on it and put it through the second bead on the other string, making the second loop, where 1 bead is overlapping and being shared in both loops of 4 beads. And I basically just kept on doing this until I got the length that I wanted that went all the way around my torso. As you can see, it's quite simple, and the whole dress is pretty much made of these circles of beads in varying shapes and sizes and stuff. And as I mentioned before, I will continue this until I can wrap this all the way around my waist, which I will then show you how to turn in order to work on the next row. So here I have almost my full length done, and now we need to do the last one a little bit differently so that our thread ends up on top so that we can go to the next row. We will do this by putting 3 beads on one thread instead of 2 and no beads on the other, and then threading the thread with no beads through the last bead on the other thread. And when you pull it tight, it should look like this. Then I took the outer thread and put 3 beads on it, doing the same thing I just did and putting the other thread through the last one to get this loop of 4 and the thread going the other direction than we came. To work across this row, I put the bottom thread through the top bead from the previous row and put 2 beads on the top thread, so the other one, and then threaded the bottom thread through the second bead we just put on the top thread. I hope that makes sense, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing here to kind of understand what I mean. And I just finished the second row, and here you can see again how I turn in order to get to the next row. After a few times, I got the hang of it and it became pretty easy. The beads I got for this project came in bags of 1,000 and I wasn't sure how many I would need, but I ended up needing way more than I originally thought. I ended up using a bit less than 6,000 beads. And so far, I was really happy with how this was coming along. I thought it was going so well and I was just so excited to see where it would go from here. Once I made enough rows to go from my waist to underbust, it was time for it to split. To do this, I marked the halfway point of the whole thing, and I forgot to mention earlier that when you are making this panel, you want to make sure that you have an even number of beads in each row so that there's no odd number and we can have an even number on each side of the bodice. Once I marked the halfway point, I worked my way normally as I had been doing until just before I reached the center, and then went on to the next row. I did that row normally, and then when I turned around and came back, I did one less loop than that previous row. You will see that it creates kind of an uneven edge with a bunch of gaps, but that is completely fine because I will go back later and fill it in. And you'll see this more as I work more rows. And the next time we have to pause is when it reaches the length where it reaches just before our armpit. And here I marked with the purple marker right in front of my armpit where I want the front of the bodice to start, which I got by putting this up to myself. And now I only went up to that purple marker and I decreased on both sides so that it becomes more triangular. And I continued decreasing on both sides until I reached a point with one bead at the top. And once I made the final loop, you can see here how I went back in the sides and filled in where the beads were missing to create a nice straight edge. And I basically just repeated all that on the other side. And this shot is kind of a behind the scenes on how I did most of the beading. I find it a lot easier to do it standing because the thread is so long and it gets less tangled when I can stand further away from it. I needed so much thread for this project, and the longer the thread I cut, the less I had to replace it and get a new one, but the more likely it was to tangle. And when I got a shorter piece of thread, it ran out quicker but was less likely to tangle. And I am telling you, it is extremely annoying when a super long piece of thread tangles and it's very hard to untangle. But I just ended up getting as long pieces of thread as I could because I also really hated replacing it because I always had to weave in the ends and it kind of felt like I was wasting thread. Oh yeah, and here I kind of went skating, which was a lot of fun too. You know, just to have a nice break from all that beading. And once that part that I did before going skating was complete, this is what it looked like. And now I had to make the straps. I attached the thread to the top bead and just made the loops of 4 beads like I did for the very first row I made. And I made it until it could reach all the way to the back, and this was kind of hard to gauge because it's kind of hard to put it up to yourself since the beads are so heavy and it keeps wanting to fall down, but I kind of just tried my best and did more of an approximate length. Once the length was complete, I decided to add another row to make it a thicker strap. But first I attached it to the back by putting it through some beads there. I think I did it about 4 beads in, and I kind of just tried my best to line it up the best I could to make it as seamless as possible. And to make the second row of the straps, I did it the same way I made the rows on the bodice until I was back at the front of the bodice where I attached it. This completes the strap, and I just repeated the same thing on the other side. Now the bodice is done and it looks like this. And it was time to go on to making the skirt. I was thinking about how to make this as I made the bodice, and I was initially thinking that if I increased the size of the beads, that would allow it to flare out and create a skirt. But the only problem with that was that I didn't know how many of each size bead I would need and how often I should increase the size. Plus, I had already bought a bunch of 10mm beads and I really didn't want that to go to waste, and it would just be too much of a hassle to get so many different sizes of beads, and it would have to get pretty big considering the fact that 10mm beads are already pretty big for beads to start out with. But then I came up with an idea where I would increase the number of beads in each loop. So you can see here that that's what I'm doing, and I'm making loops of 5 instead of 4. It was a little bit tricky at first because it doesn't really line up very nicely, and it's kind of hard to see which bead comes next, especially once I went on to the second row of 5 loops. But I really liked the gathered effect it gave. And after doing a few rows with loops of 5, I did loops of 6, and I thought this gave the skirt enough volume, so I stuck with the loops of 6 and didn't increase any further. And I was just planning on continuing this until I got the length I wanted. But this proved to be much more time-consuming than I had anticipated. At first it was fine because as I did each row, I could see the skirt getting longer and longer, and it just really excited me to see that. But as I made more and more rows, it just felt like it was never gonna end. Plus, I bought a lot of pearls for this, which was expensive, and it looked like I was not going to have enough. And I did not want to spend any more money because I had already spent more money on this dress than I normally do on my projects. And as I was beading through the dress, I came across beads that were stuck together like this, so I just cut them apart with scissors, which was actually kind of fun. There were a lot of twins, and I actually had a few with 4 stuck together, but that was the longest I found. I continued on what seemed to be never-ending rows of beads. I did rows upon rows until I started to give up hope. But then I went ice skating again, which was a nice break from beading. When I came home, I started working on it again and did a few rows until I just kind of gave up. So I've been working on it a lot, but it's taking so long and it feels like there's no progress. And I'm just really losing motivation, and I think I'm gonna have to buy so much more beads at the amount I'm going through right now. So I'm not really sure if I want to finish this, I don't know. But then I came up with a genius idea that would quickly add length to the skirt while not using that many beads. And it was to make these strings of beads going all along the perimeter of the skirt. I put 15 beads on the string and skipped 3 loops of 6 and connected it into the 4th one. Then I kept repeating that by putting 15 beads and kept connecting it. And this made it go by so much faster and used so many less beads, which was just what I needed. This gave me a newfound motivation and I was able to complete the dress. I repeated this again, this time connecting it to the middle bead from the row before. Then, as the final touch, I added 4 beads to the bottom of each section so that it looked like this. And then it was finally done. After so much work, I finally completed it, and I think it turned out so pretty. It was definitely a heavy dress and a lot of work, but I think it was all worth it in the end. Thank you if you made it to the end, and see you next time.